Thanks for joining me, Andrew. I'm really excited to learn about your user story and how you've been using pieces in your development workflow as a
Mhm,
master's student. So,
mhm.
if you don't mind, just sharing your name, your role, and a brief history of your experience with software development.
Sure. So I'm Andrew Quintana, and I am a new master's student, or new a year and a half in. And I used to actually be a test systems engineer for the physical side of robotic systems, and just learned how amazing the automation, so the back end to all the automation systems that I was working with, and really wanted to dive a lot deeper into those. So I'm pursuing a computer science master's focusing on robotics.
That's interesting. Okay, so you
Mhm.
sort of made this shift from hardware to
Mhm.
software, and
Yeah.
you're using this master's program as a way to get there and get new, a different type of career. How has that
Mhm.
experience been for you so far?
Initially, it was quite a challenge to, lean into all of that, which is part of why I chose to do a part-time master's. I knew I was gonna have to study how to code alongside my classes that are at graduate level at Georgia Tech. It's a really competitive, challenging university, and so it 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 was definitely a challenge, but once I started using pieces and, really got the hang of it things started really flowing for me, so I'm
Nice.
feeling really good about it all now.
Cool. Well, yeah, so tell me a little bit about, your tech stack, what's your development environment look like? What
Mhm,
IDEs are you using?
sure.
What languages do you commonly work with? Any other
Mhm.
tools you want to mention?
Yeah, my tool chain, I use, VS Code. I use for Python, which is typically the programming language I use for most classes. A lot of them are algorithm heavy. I'm doing some machine learning and AI and, computer vision type things, and so with that, we're doing a lot of Python. Right now, I'm in a game AI class, which has been really fun and really awesome seeing the simulations and whatnot. And so that's been C sharp. I'm taking a class next semester in C. Pretty much all of those. I don't know about C actually. I haven't really looked into that yet, but the C sharp and Python have been in VS Code. And a side project I'm working on is I've been using C Lion through JetBrains and have been really happy with both coding environments so far.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to learn a little bit about your experience before pieces.
Mhm,
So, what was your usual workflow?
mhm,
What, tools did you use to manage code?
mhm.
Are there any other sort of platforms that you were using to augment the existing tools that you have, or sort of integrate your workflow together, or just overall
Mhm.
provide a little bit of a productivity boost for you?
Sure. So before I wasn't doing much coding. I was doing using Jupyter notebooks with Python and yeah, in my test engineer, system engineer role, creating automations for robots to run some simulation, some testing, gather some data so you can come up with some conclusions and give that the design engineers. With that, Jupyter notebooks ended up just being my kind of testing system where I would learn Python by just testing things and running it internally before I made the robot move. Um, that was made it a lot easier because I could do a lot of trial and error and learn from documentation as well. Then with C++, it was quite a bit harder. We used Eclipse for all of our code for our robots, and I knew some C from doing Arduino projects in, my undergraduate studies, but I didn't have a huge grasp of C++, and it'd been a while, so it seemed very foreign to me. We did use a visual-based, state machine design, um, add-on. I forget what it was called, but it had a fun name. But, basically, you could create, finite state machines and move around all the pieces, make it so you dive deeper into lower levels, which made it really convenient for people like me who didn't have that experience in the language. Now, I had to learn it because I didn't want to keep bugging the software engineers, and I feel like that would have been a great opportunity for me to use pieces at the time.
Right, right. Okay, so, um, if you did have pieces in that
Mhm,
instance, sort of how do you think you would have used it?
mhm. So, I think the best way to have used it was to I know you can download locally the files from your repos. And if I was able to just pull in, say, I was just working with one robot subsystem, if I was to just be able to pull in that whole subsystem onto my pieces and I've either asked the Copilot about certain things or get it to comment throughout for when the documentation was a little light, it would have been really helpful. Our software engineers were incredible, and they were very generous about their time, but it's obviously not the best to distract them or pull them off of a project to help draw on a whiteboard to explain how something works. And so with pieces, I feel like you could skip a lot of that. Um, Obviously need that interpersonal integration within a team, but it can help save some unnecessary communication.
Right. Okay, cool. So you started using pieces a little less than a year ago, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, you were doing this in combination with your sort of change in career path, your
Mm.
move towards going to Georgia Tech and learning software development,
Yeah.
getting your master's degree. So,
Mhm.
what was your initial impression of the tool? I know you were getting thrown a lot of information from your
Mhm.
program and probably learning a lot of new languages and tools
Yeah.
alongside pieces, but when you first downloaded it and installed it, what were your initial impressions? Did anything catch your eye?
Yeah, so I started, I think, last June, and I'd just taken my first 2 graduate level, like, heavy coding classes. Those were, definitely a challenge, and I stepped up as much as I could and actually succeeded in those, which I was happy about, but then moving forward, I that was in Python. Python's scripting language, it's a lot easier to learn than C++, plus plus. And so I wanted to learn C++ plus plus to try to do my own project, and at that time, I just wanted to do small little projects. That was when I brought in pieces, and with it being a bit harder of a language to grasp, there's memory management and things like that involved. I I used pieces to essentially be my companion. It was like more of a collaborator at that point, and I still had to dive through code bases. I still had to look into everything, but I was able to then ask it questions and whatnot, and it really just sped up my learning curve for a language that I'd been looking at, but I'd never had to really fully implement.
Okay, cool. So, let's jump into it. I wanna learn more about how you use pieces in your daily
Mhm,
workflow now that
mhm,
you've picked it up, you've got some experience with it. You mentioned the Copilot. Is this the
mhm,
main feature that you use of pieces, or are you saving
mhm,
snippets,
mhm.
sharing, doing other things like that?
Yeah. So when I was learning new languages, I really liked the ability to save snippets that I would commonly use. And so this could be anything like when I was, say, in C++, plus plus, if I was using the Open CV library to do computer vision type work, and I wanted to remember, oh, I need to um, change the color and create a different sized image and modify it in a certain way. And it was something I would do repeatedly to an image. I saved that snippet, and then as I improved that, I would update that snippet. Or as if I wanted to research how to improve it, it would present me with all that information in the that snippet view. Let's see here. And other than that, when I would be looking at code bases, not always was I working with the Copilot. That was something I used a lot, but I would also just have it comment one of my code bases so that I would have more of the documentation. The TAs, I mean, they want you to dive in and work really hard at understanding the code. And I do work on that, but having the extra comments from pieces is really helpful. And I think it's a little bit more representative of the industry, and then the just the documentation needs. It's also nice to see because you can see some like work in progress things and be able to distinguish them a little bit better.
Nice. So, yeah, documentation is something that developers often struggle with.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the most difficult task,
Mhm.
it's pretty tedious and
Mhm.
one that people like to automate a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you exactly you use pieces to add documentation to your code.
Sure. Well, let's see. I do like how structured pieces comments are, and I like how they'll actually when you're having sometimes I ask for kind of a larger let me backtrack a sec. Sometimes I like to create utility functions like I described earlier through the Copilot, and I like how it structures its comments on those. And it actually inspired me for how I do some of my comments now because I've always been a documentation nerd as a test and systems engineer. But uh, yeah, through pieces, I like how they would structure just comments before and I was before and after. If it almost like what's it called? You have like a dot dot dot. Like there's ongoing code before this, there's ongoing code after this. And I would actually use that as kind of a structure where you would say maybe like to do tasks, to do convert this again, like an image to a different type to HSV because I'm going to be doing an HDR, creating an HDR image later. Uh, so just in structuring the um, my code moving forward. I was inspired by pieces, but also the comments were how I used them directly. It was more taking in the code base um, into pieces, letting pieces comment on certain sections that were under commented or under documented, and it would make it so that I could understand that code better. The TAs were really impacted. I'm sure they still are. They seem challenged at times. At other times, they're super responsive and really helpful. So uh, there can be kind of gaps in the documentation, and so it's really nice to have pieces fill in those gaps.
Great. So Pieces works really well when it's integrated throughout your entire workflow. A lot of people
Mhm,
that use Pieces on the desktop application, they also have plugins with the IDE into
mhm,
their collaboration software if they're on a team or in their browser to do more research and problem solving without the context switching. And it learns from the things that you're interacting with, so that provides more contextual results for you. I'm
mhm,
curious, do you have any integrations with Pieces?
mhm,
And maybe you could tell me about your desktop setup? Like, do you use an extra monitor? Where does
mhm.
Pieces sort of fit into your existing applications?
Yeah, I don't really use too many add-ons. I'm a bit of a I like to keep things as simple as possible or as bare bones as possible to require me to learn more, or to or maybe be more in tune with the system as it is. Um, this kinda has to do with the kind of projects I like to take on for learning where, like, the robot that I'm working on has is pretty bare bones. Uh, but I after you showed me some articles the other day about the integrations, it seems like it won't really interrupt that kind of learning process that I have and I like to have with different systems. So soon I will try that out. Uh, however, so oh yeah, you mentioned the different monitors. So my typical setup is two monitors. I have one with my code that I'm working on, and then I have another with like any PDFs or journal articles, or scientific articles that I'm using to implement my code. Maybe I have to do like a seam carving project, and so I have to lapse down an image and shrink it widthwise or vertically using seam carving, which is an AI based. It looks for different seams in the image to remove pixels to remove so that it can shrink it down and make it look like the same picture. And so that's just an example of the kind of project we work on. And so I'll have the journal article, I'll have my assignment, I'll have a textbook on my PDF. Then I will be able to swipe over, look at my pieces, and then I'll have another screen, another desktop where I'll have my Chrome browser. And I used to be just only on the Chrome browser, going on Geeks to Geeks, one of my favorite websites, and looking up different ways of implementing different types of algorithms or uh, to better understand the language when I was just learning it. But now I'm pretty much just pieces and then the my code. Uh, once I understand the assignment, once I understand the journal article and what you're trying to implement.
Great to hear.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so tell me about other tools that you've used for this type of workflow. Was Pieces brand new for you as you're getting started and you really haven't evaluated other tools that might help, create some efficiencies in your workflow
Mhm.
or not? Or, does Pieces provide any noticeable, unique productivity boost for you that other tools haven't?
The only other thing I can compare to is ChatGPT with debugging specifically. Yeah, I've used ChatGPT and the Copilot for debugging, and with a good context setup, it feels like it's significantly better. I feel like I'm more productive. Other than that, I mean, I was 4 months into really intensive coding when I started this, so I don't really have too many other resources.
Yeah, that's fair.
I also don't really use the language models too much um, or GPT services too much for this coding because I mean, it's providing what's already available, and that's not what the projects we're working on. This projects we're working on typically aren't available on the internet, and because they have really strict rules on what can be posted, what you can use online, and so it's yeah, there's not really much I can get access to. So having a companion like Pieces is a significantly better resource than I've found. I haven't luckily, I just haven't had to look for anything else, so it's just been really nice to have, and it's really set me up for success with the new languages I've had to attack and the different classes and disciplines, and I mean, yeah, I never doubted that this taking on, this whole learning computer science as a master's was gonna be easy, but, it's yeah, this has made it a lot more productive, let's say. I haven't had to spend nearly as many late nights as I did the first semester when I was really intensively coding and having to learn just Python, but, with computer vision and computational photography, algorithms.
Well, that's an interesting distinction that you made earlier as well with ChatGPT, generating code that is, the parameters are built off of online
Mhm,
accessible information.
mhm,
But and for that reason, many developers are a little bit nervous about using uh, code generation tools in their workflow as
mhm,
they're in school because they're trying to actually learn how the code works. And it seems like you have a nice balance
mhm,
between digging through the code, understanding how each aspect of
mhm,
it works while
mhm.
still using an AI tool, not as much for generation, but for question answering. Can you explain a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do use code generation a bit for classes and whatnot, but it's really just for utility functions. I found when in like that first semester, whenever I'd need like a printing function, I like to really create good logging systems because I was a test systems engineer working really closely with operations. So making good logging is really important for me to have good debugging. And so creating all these really good utility functions and efficient systems to go around the project I was actually working on. I would kind of just dive into those too much, and those were really exciting for me um, on top of the actual algorithm. So yeah, I would use it for that with respect to generating code. However, with as a companion, just being able to better understand different parts of the algorithm was really important to me. I could look up an implementation of, uh, say, let's say A star, a pathfinding algorithm. We had to implement it. Obviously, had to have some significant changes that made it so that we couldn't just copy it off of. I mean, I'm going to just use Geeks for Geeks again. Um, I didn't have to copy it off. I would never have been able to copy off their website, and so being able to highlight certain sections and then put it into Copilot and ask it questions made it really helpful. I had a textbook that would go talk about certain sections and whatnot, but sometimes that would still leave some questions. And while TAs are really responsive, I like to try to find as independent of means as possible and use TAs or mentors in the kind of last ditch situations, almost treating it like a workplace where I don't want to distract my coworker who's working on software, whatever, something very important. So yeah, I feel like pieces has helped me establish a sense of independence while being able to learn the content itself uh, in a way that's faster and a way that actually sticks too.
Are there any other examples that you can share as a master's student of a specific project that you're working on?
Mm.
Something that, you've been able to integrate pieces into your workflow for?
Let's see. So I guess one example is using specifically the cloud-based Copilot and having local files from a course I'm working on. I'm able to both use the context of the framework from the projects that I'm working on and combine it with we're using the Unity, not Unreal Engine, just the Unity engine. And so I'm able to both have conversations based on what's provided on the internet, libraries from the internet, and from the framework created by the TAs, and having it as a companion to help describe things. And I prevent some digging, but also when you look at, say, the snippet page, you could direct references to web pages or code bases where I can, or source code that I can um, learn more directly from if I want the specific information. That has been invaluable to me. I mean, sometimes finding the source code can be a little, take 5 minutes or so, but sometimes that 5 minutes is critical. You're doing a little bit of procrastinating, not that I do it that often.
Of course not. No way.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So, the point of getting a master's degree, beyond just learning software development is actually getting a job, and a
Mhm,
new career. You're transitioning from hardware to software. It's
mhm,
not an easy journey, especially since you weren't in computer science in your undergrad. And so,
mhm.
do you have any advice for other people getting their masters in software development, and maybe, some learnings that they could take away from your journey?
It's been basically like a mentor, like a senior engineer I'm working under from my experience in other disciplines, where I can ask questions that are pertinent and they have the tacit knowledge of the frameworks that or the libraries or the 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 type of algorithms or work that we're doing. And so I think it just feels like I have someone that I can go to when I'm having a trouble or a blocker. And it might not be I mean, it almost works like a mentor typically does, where they're not gonna give you the direct answer necessarily, but they'll point you in the right direction, which still requires you to put in that effort to connect the dots and whatnot. You just ask questions that help you direct it in the right direction. And I mean that and going to office hours where professors wouldn't just give you the answer, they'll just ask you better questions or point you in the right direction. It feels like one of those situations when I work with the co-pilot. And like I mentioned, the just being able to document where there's gaps is it can be invaluable at times. Yeah.
Nice. So your recommendations for master students is to just use pieces.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just it feels a lot like a work environment where you can bounce ideas off someone, you can ask for some support without them giving you a direct answer of how to do something. I mean, typically it gives you anywhere from 3 to 5 potential routes, be it for debugging or for resolving or approaching a problem. So yeah, it usually doesn't even give you a direct answer. So yeah, you're gonna need to figure out what's the best angle of attack anyways.
Well, I'd love to get some feedback from you as well.
Mhm,
Our engineering team is obviously trying to
mhm,
continue building a product for developers like yourself.
yeah,
And so I'd like to learn from you if there's any, features that you'd like to see in future updates.
mhm,
You've been with us for a year almost. I
mhm,
think that was just around when we launched the Pieces Copilot back in
mhm,
June. So
mhm,
you've seen it come a long way since then. Uh,
mhm,
are there maybe you can remark on how we've evolved and
mhm,
how that's either, improved or just changed your workflow a little bit,
sure.
and maybe some things you'd like to see in the future?
I do I think you guys added snippet discovery somewhat recently. Don't remember when that was. That was really nice just to be able to upload some documents and find a bunch of snippets from there. I really like that. I think I don't know. I like everything that I've had to work with. I think the biggest challenge for me has been a little bit of organization. I'm a huge organization nerd, and like I have layers and layers and layers of folders personally. I mean, and then talk about on my work computer, it's the same there. Uh, in ways that I try to be as organized as possible with the saved materials. While you have the different ways of sorting them, I would really prefer to have like a folder hierarchy and those kinds of things, like a typical file explorer. It would almost be like having a dashboard of exactly what you're working on, as opposed to everything that you kind of have created snippets from. That said, um, I could have also renamed every snippet as I brought it in and added tags or something that made it relevant, or use the search function or learn the search function a lot more. And I think that's kind of a workaround that I could use for now.
We've we've done a lot of work recently on normalizing our data, making sure that one tag that equals another tag,
Mm-hmm.
um, actually is associated with each other so that you'll be able to look into, snippets that have the same tag, right? Snippets that have the same
Hmm.
related link, and vice versa. Look at these materials from a sort of circular perspective so that you'll be able to find different materials that you might need, discover what's related, and sort of group things based on some different ways that might not be traditional. Is that something that, I mean, obviously you might need a little bit of a visual to understand exactly what I'm talking about, but um, is that something that you might find useful in the organization of your code snippets and materials, or do you think a file explorer is going to be, the end
Yeah.
all sort of experience that you'll need?
Um, I mean, I think I'd have to see it. I can be taught different organization methods. I've learned different ones from different companies I work for and whatnot. So I'm totally open to it. I have my personal preference, and that's what I was mentioning. But I'm happy to learn what is currently set up, and based on a lot of the changes that you guys have done, it seems like they've integrated well. And so if I feel like if I take on one of your prescribed organization or kind of just and I thought or approach organization methods, then it'll kind of seamlessly work into the next one.
Well, let's hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, just put a lot of pressure on your engineers, but yeah.
yeah. Well, we get a lot of feedback, like, people want to they're working on different projects, they want to group by project, or they're working on different machines. There's a lot of different ways that people wanna organize their things, and a flat list is not the end all solution, so we are working towards something.
Mhm.
We're just still trying to identify if it's both the file explorer and the sort of, circular navigational system that we're working on. Um, but yeah, we're getting there, just getting some feedback from our users. Are there any, like, bugs that you ran into recently that we should know about?
Oh, actually, I did have some bugs where Copilot would if I put in a lot of text, it would have an error code, and then it would work, but then every time I typed a new kind of prompt or something or a question, it would repeat the error code, and I sent in a bug. I
Support
I
ticket.
sent yeah, I sent some feedback, and it was fixed relatively soon after that,
Oh,
within
nice.
a month or 2. Yeah.
Yeah, usually you just gotta turn it off and turn it back on, but I appreciate you
Oh,
reaching out.
yeah.
So that got
That did fix it temporarily, but then the bug would come back. But yeah, I like sending in feedback. I had to do that a lot in operations, with robotics, so I'm used to just reporting on what I'm seeing and whatnot.
nice. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah.
So you've dealt with our support a little bit. We actually just recently launched like a new sort of GitHub support board, where our users can put up discussions and try to identify each other's issues so that we're not one to one responding to every inquiry. We can just sort of point people there. Have you seen that before? Do you have any thoughts on like the ideal support process based on your last role?
I have not looked into it, and as a user, I prefer to just send feedback, and then it magically my what I requested disappears.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to not really I like to be low touch, as a user of a service, and, that was my experience, so I don't know, it looks pretty good to me. I haven't had to do too much troubleshooting with, a use case that I wanted to have, and usually in those cases, if I start doing troubleshooting and I'm working on a critical project, like I typically am in these where I mean, the timeframes for these projects are pretty short sometimes, and, we're working quite a bit, to especially early on, I had to work a lot to just keep up with the classes. Usually, I would just ditch the the service, but I never really had to do that for pieces. It was always useful and always provided me good information throughout my implementation. Oh, well, I was gonna say the only thing I'd stop using pieces for is tuning, but I mean, you have to just watch a system, how it works, and then tune. So you're never really gonna get any sort of understanding from unless actually, with Copilot, I have learned a little bit about tuning where I would ask a question like, "Why does this output parameter increase when I tune this value and I use the context, and it can give useful information for that.
That's cool. So, what's your overall satisfaction level with pieces, and would you recommend it to other people?
I personally have seen a really big increase in my productivity, both in learning new languages, getting context from code bases, um, developing like you guys said, you developing utility functions to support my work in kind of like more novel work, or not novel, but more unique kind of work that isn't really found all over the internet. And so, yeah, it's been a great support for this transition, and hopefully by the time this goes up, I'll have a job to show for that. Um, but once I get into a job, I'm gonna try to push wherever I am to use this locally, to have people that work adjacently to software use this for understanding the code that the team is developing better, um, and to help with documentation and everything. I mean, I see use cases on both the software and the hardware side. So yeah, I will absolutely recommend this, especially hopefully going to robotics companies in the future.
So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. It sounds like the the instances where you're using pieces are very innovative applications, right? Like you're
Mhm.
working with robotics, you're working with AI tools, you're learning, on a cutting edge master's degree systems and technologies that don't necessarily exist yet. And so if you can't even find them on Geeks to Geeks or whatever your favorite websites are, most likely the GPT, LLM that's trained
Mhm,
on the internet from 2, 3 years ago doesn't have that information either. I mean, this
mhm,
is, you're discovering new ideas and solving problems with
mhm,
cutting
mhm.
edge research. And so, um, would you say that the ability to set context for your conversations based on your own local repositories, code snippets that you have saved that you've worked on yourself, are the driving force to that sets pieces apart from other generative AI and question answering type AI tools for your research?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, especially with respect to, um, getting better responses like you mentioned, for both software engineers who need to quickly learn about the other code in their code base, and also the not less technical or less software technical team members. I mean, we had mechanical engineers or test engineers trying to get better understanding of how the robots worked, how different systems worked to be able to and product managers type roles. I mean, they have to go up to a desk of a software engineer frequently, and we all know how distractions can bug you, and you're not bug you, but like cause you to get a little bit off track and lose productivity when you are, really in the zone, and so both enabling team members and reducing some of the unnecessary communication, I think is a huge benefit that can come directly from the local, really, improved context for your GPTs. I'm really happy with it, and I'm looking forward to the changes and continuing to use it and hopefully, pushing it at wherever my next job is.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Andrew. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely.